Hi, welcome. How was lunch? It was delicious. It was pasta, so I didn't have any because I know I would fall asleep. Okay. The great news is we have Tim joining us to talk about not tech, because it's a soft skills track. And we all know it's not always about tech. So, with that being said, really quick, you will have Post-it notes here. Please take them. We want to get rid of them. They have the old logo. We'd like to switch over to the new logo. I'm sure shopping lists can probably go on there, paper airplanes, all the good things. But let's welcome Tim.
Great. Well, thank you, Jenny. So thanks so much for you guys carving time out to come to the summit and then coming to my presentation. I'm really excited to be here. I'm privileged to be here. And a little bit of an introduction on the presentation first. Trailblazers, as architects, we blaze new trails and we constantly are pursuing that. New ways of thinking, new ways of doing, and how do we move forward. And what you'll hopefully hear today is emphasis on, the soft skills, the behaviors, just to be from an awareness perspective, and then principles will come into play here. And then the characteristics of courage, resiliency, tenacity, collaboration, building relationships, all key elements in terms of ensuring as architects we're effective, right? And it's really an art, less of a science when it comes to that type of thing. So real quickly, an introduction of myself. Linda pinged me after Thanksgiving and asking if I could present on this track. And I haven't done one like this before. It's usually a lot of the what and the how in architecture. And going back a little bit, I met Linda, 10 years ago when I was working at Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was my real first introduction to business architecture, and presented at a summit back then, probably number 5, number 4, I don't know. And she asked if I would join the TCBF board, which I did, which was the best decision ever. And as a result, it led to a lot of other opportunities, one of which was Cargill, because I met Dean at that time. And it's an amazing, amazing community. And I've stuck with it ever since at some level or some capacity. My pedigree goes way back. I've been in a lot of different vertical businesses throughout my career, starting in energy management, and then moving into a consulting role, post-sales consulting and what have you. And I'm telling you this because it's the accumulation of things that ultimately led me to architecture. There's no straight path to architecture. There's different paths, right? And then from there, I moved into a financial company. That's when I got my feet wet on analytics and data warehousing, the Bill Inman days and Ralph Kimball days, back then. And a lot of that stuff still applies, right? And then subsequently went back to some consulting, boutique firm, and then got exposure to retail and ASP model. And whether I knew it or not, we were running a product mindset team. I worked for a startup, and we were a pod of 5 people, and they had pods. And we were in charge of analyzing, working with a customer. It was an ASP model. We built out a retail platform, marketing platform, customer analytics, and we owned it, soup to nuts. And you had to wear many hats. So that in itself was an experience, not to mention the startup, because when the VC started running out, things got a little spicy. Subsequently, I went to Fair Isaac, similar model. And then I moved to a services-based industry, and I owned the data integration team, database administration. That's when I really started to, on the side, do some architecture, not even knowing it. And then my CIO asked if I could put a little more overt intentional effort behind that based on what you're seeing, because we needed to rationalize our portfolio. And then subsequently, Blue Cross Blue Shield, huge transformation there. Business architecture played a significant role, and that's really where the passion really amped up. And then subsequently Cargill, which was a whole nother world, and multiple businesses, and I see some Cargillites in here, and alumni around throughout the conference. And a whole nother level of experience applying some of the architecture. And now I'm at Delta Airlines. So I don't have a list of all the different vertical industries, but I'm checking them off, right? But one thing is true, architecture is needed everywhere. Similar problems, similar opportunities, it doesn't matter. And I'm fortunate to be in that position. So today, really the objectives, what I'm hoping to convey to you is soft skills, they are critical. They're kind of ignored, to be honest. I think everybody kind of goes on their own based on their own personal experience, and it's hard to pull those to the surface, say, what do we really require to be effective as architects? So I'm going to try and attempt to do that today based on my experience. I'll walk through the agenda. It's fairly brief. And then obviously we're consultants and advisors when it really comes down to it. Whether you're a consultant by nature and or within a corporation, we're in a consulting role, an advising role. And my hope is that as you listen to me talk about different things, you can reflect on your own experiences and say, yeah, that resonates. And then ask yourself, what did you do? What was the implication, or what did you do to change, right? Which is a big topic at this conference too. So real quick, I fall back on the fundamental, what problem are we solving? Soft skills are challenging, and the organization, especially large companies, doesn't matter what size necessarily, but I'll speak to a corporate environment, can be very difficult to navigate. Just based on sheer size, complexity, and people and personalities. Why does it matter to understand and be aware of those different aspects and facets of soft skills, and more importantly, behaviors, the forces that are basically probably derailing what we want to achieve? Because as architects, we see the end in mind, we want to do this, but how do we get there? It matters to be aware, and then how do we navigate around that? And then I'm going to provide hopefully some practical tools and steps. Nothing earth-shattering, but I'm a big believer that you need to take the attention away from the architect and put it on a more of a pragmatic, what are some techniques and tools we can use? Fit for purpose, at the right time, with the right people. That's the key. You can't lead with a tool or a technique and just say, here's what we're going to do and hope it works. You have to be able to ascertain based on those stakeholders where they're at and meet them where they're at. And then if there's time left, which there probably will be, if there's questions, feel free to ask, and I'm obviously available for the rest of the day. So here we go. Okay. And again, this isn't, the caveat here, this isn't consistent, but these are some observations I've had and themes I've seen. Visibility tends to be a big currency within organizations. Hey, if someone's really visible, and visibility in terms of, hey, we were able to go fast, we were able to deliver, look at the volume we have, and this perspective of perceived certainty that, hey, we delivered value, I think rings true in a lot of cases. And as architects, we're trying to navigate through that, and we end up, in some cases, architecting in terms of form of diagrams or outputs, and they say, yeah, we have an architecture, we're good. But has it really confirmed and or affirmed that, hey, are we on target for outputs and value that we expect? Is it understood by others that this is what your boundaries are in terms of what to work within? Those type of things start to come up, and in a lot of cases that might not be true. The operating models and culture, I say reward shallower thinking. Again, back to the checking the box. We need, we have processes in place. Maybe our incentives aren't necessarily aligned to value or outcomes. It's aligned to, I did this, I'm done. And I have found throughout my career, not to diminish project management or what have you, we all need those disciplines, but there's a friction between that and architects. And the reason is because their incentive is, I need to get this done, this time, this money, this budget out the door. Meanwhile, the architects are going, hold the phone. We were brought in at this point. These things need to be, these are concerning to me. We need to adjust. And that's where you start to get a conversation. Now, it can be a healthy conversation, and we don't necessarily have to agree, but then at minimum, we have to call it out and we have to capture it. And then that's when the accountability starts to kick in, and people are like, well, I don't want that exposed, or, those type of behaviors start to show up, right? And I see people nodding, and it seems to be resonating. There's also propensity for instant gratification. And especially given the world we're living in now, as things are faster and faster, but not to mention the information overload in terms of AI. See a lot of AI slop out there. I'm guilty of it. I mean, I use it and what have you. But all of that lends itself to overwhelmed and being overwhelmed, and also leads to reactive type responses in my mind, and including when we have like where I'm working now, and frankly in other jobs, our ecosystem is so complex, and when something goes bump in the night, everybody has to respond and react, which is good. The sense of urgency is there. We're going to take care of it. There's a high level of value in doing that, as it should, but I always feel like that seems to be the bar. But when we try to position for more long-term thinking or long game versus the short game, we're challenged, right? Because we want that instant gratification. And those long game strategic thinking doesn't necessarily manifest itself out of the gate, right? So with that, how do we apply soft skills to influence from architecture to distraction versus clarity? And so what we think is what we're doing isn't necessarily true. It's a distraction. So how do we ensure clarity? And again, back to what I kind of alluded to, soft skills, we're navigating different behaviors, and those are difficult. As much as it's difficult to understand our ecosystem, let's say on the technical side, at least it's somewhat static. But human behaviors vary depending on individuals, cultures, teams. And so trying to read the room is really hard, but it's critical. So that's one element of it. And workplace culture happens over time. And I'm a believer in that there's certain incentives that shape that, whether it's personal and or at business. So I mentioned the project managers, an example, I pick on them. Their incentive is different than what architecture's is. So they're colliding, right? Or if I'm working with a business stakeholder, their incentive is to ensure I've got 999 and my operation is running. I don't have time right now, nor do I have an incentive to take time to carve out for strategic thinking and planning, as an example. And maybe some cases they're not necessarily wired for it either. So with that, there's also a propensity to be risk adverse because people like predictability. Architects are there to bring clarity to that. We have to jump into the deep end. We have to take some risks, and we're wired that way. We have to believe in what we're chasing, and that's hard for individuals, for anybody, but especially if people are in a mode of operation or role that's very predictable, to switch to, well, are you willing to jump with me and do this? Well, my name's on the line. I don't know if I want to or not. And it's not they say it overtly, it's just semi-conscious, right? And especially in corporations where things there's overhead and processes to follow. Ooh, what was that? They fall back on that, and it starts to erode the ability to do innovation and what have you. It can result in negative workplace behaviors because of being risk advertent. There's a tendency to want to ensure your status and where you're positioned. So in the keynote, there was hey, I was an expert here. Now I'm moving to a different place. Now I'm not the expert, right? That's a status piece, right? And that's scary. And so when it's all said and done, what does that imply in terms of outcomes? It does erode, and it does put risk into ultimately achieving those business outcomes, right? So that kind of lends itself to what are the implications of this? Potentially misaligned incentives. So I talked about that already, risk, which ultimately result in we're overshadowing meaningful outcomes for the sake of just achieving whatever, and we're not aligned to make sure that's not there. Okay, we tend to minimize exposure, and I talked about lack of innovation because we're risk adverse. I know when I was at Cargill, we had training they were trying to steer us from the big monolithic to more innovative thinking and doing, the red thinking versus blue thinking. So retraining our mind maps and thinking on how can we start to iterate more on any idea, whether it's architecture ideas or what have you, to go faster, fail fast. And by the way, we have your back if you fail. Right? That's the idea. And you're safe, right? Kind of thing. So architects have to navigate those tensions constantly, every day. And the ability to identify them and then be able to figure out, okay, how do I meet halfway with these stakeholders and how can I start to influence is really the art behind this. So why is it important to recognize these? And more importantly, why is it important to address these behaviors? I'll jump on a word, wisdom. And I don't know why this came to me. This was probably a month, well, after I chatted with Linda about doing this, wisdom came up in one of the platforms, I don't know where. I said, you know, that's a word I never hear much. And wisdom, based on what I saw, was defined as experience and the ability to see patterns. And I go, oh my gosh, that's architects, right? And so it's accumulation of our experience and then the ability to identify patterns. And then with that, position those patterns and bring clarity. And guiding decisions and informing decisions really is the essence of what we're trying to do. Neil in the keynote did a wonderful job of encapsulating that, and it was really fun to see him talk. Oh my God, I touched on some of the same things. So it's like, this seems to be a common thing. And without that, we know our ecosystem suffers, right? So if it's reactive and we're not thoughtful and intentional, and we're not informing decisions, we start to build a fragile ecosystem and solutions. And the resiliency starts to degrade over time, which ultimately has impacts on our business, our customers, and what have you. And ultimately diminishes our value or outcomes. So back to what Jenny is saying, architects sometimes tend to be seen as the technologists. I'm not saying that isn't true. A lot of us grew up through that. However, architecture is way more than that. I would say, gosh, I don't know, high percentage of our time is navigating in the art, right? And our job is to inform decisions, provide options and choices. And we have to do that in context of those different behavioral forces that we're trying to navigate. So every instance is different. As an example, I'm working with the ops team right now, and it's an area in operations where the mindset is very, yep, we have to do this. We have things that have to happen in a certain sequence, on our flight schedules and what have you. When it comes to strategic thinking and long-term thinking, to really take a step back and look at it and have better informed decisions versus silo decisions, it's a big leap. It's a huge leap for them. So I'm in the process of trying to help stand up some techniques and work with them to do that. They want it, they just don't know how to do it. And so that's the good news. We'll see how it goes. But again, navigating, understanding where they are, empathizing with where they are, meeting them there, recognizing it and saying, how about this? How can I help you? What can we do to provide you context to make better informed long-term decisions so that we're not building silos, which they complain about. And it manifests itself in multiple tools, complexity. So principles is when did I come across principles? Many years ago, but I really didn't take much notice of principles. And we talk about architecture principles. There's principles at different levels. Yeah, they're the guardrails, they guide decisions. But in reflecting on my career and when principles would show up, I go, are we really applying the principles? Are we really executing against them? And I would say in a lot of cases, no. So then I'm like, well, then what's the point of doing principles? If everybody, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, then what's the point, right? Taking a step back on principles, it's more than just a definition and guiding decision-making. We've taken it a step further, and when I was at Carve, we defined principles, and Jenny can attest to this. We said, let's make sure we understand not just the definition, but let's understand the value behind the principle. What's the why? And then let's understand with that principle, if we don't do that, what's the implications? Which was easy to answer because most of them we weren't aligned to anyhow, so we could easily articulate examples of that, right? Those examples and those implications have cost, right? Or they create risk. So that was good. Next step, and I'm having this challenge right now at Delta. Well, Tim, how are we gonna, no one wants to do these. I said, it's up to us as architects to start doing it. We just need to demonstrate, put yourself out there and do, and really, and it doesn't have to be laborious, it doesn't have to be long. So as an example, right now, we invested 1 hour of time on data architecture principles, because like any business, it's heavy in data. They didn't have any. So I'm like, okay, let's put these down on paper. Do we align to these, small group of us? Let's test it out. Out of 60-minute investment with 5 of us, for every principle, we came out with multiple action items, gaps of understanding. There was 2 we could stretch and say, we're meeting it. The value started to show immediately in terms of, oh, we hadn't considered that, or this is what we need to do. Again, anchored to why is it important? Here's the value we're chasing, right? So it's a technique and it's super helpful. And really, ultimately, what it does is it elevates our role from a, oversight. We have governance principles as a foundation for governance. That is true. I like to say foundation for enabling. But really moving us into that more strategic leadership role. Asking the right questions is probably the key. It's not about the answers. It's about what questions have we not asked that we need to identify the big rocks, the risks. And we might not know the answer out of the gate, but then we can start pulling the thread. And if you can get people comfortable with that and saying, it's okay to say, I don't know. Now let's work together and let's get some answers if we can. Or we're going to table it because we don't know enough and we're going to have to iterate and test some of this out to validate, right? That sets the stage for key activity, key follow-up, and ultimately iterating. So principles are great. And I mentioned who ensures this. Well, that's us. And that's where you start to get into that consultative mode and engagement with our stakeholders, our peers. The concept of influence, I know, is, you come into an organization like Delta 2 or Cargo. Yeah, Tim, you're going to have to be able to influence leadership. What the heck's that mean? Okay, wait, I don't have authority, but I'm accountable for architecture. So we have to lean into the influence side. And really what it distills down to is we need to do the research. We need to reflect. We need to take the time to look at the situation, bring to the surface, hey, here's context, and then provide options and trade-offs as articulated yesterday to give our stakeholders options. Because in the end of the day, it's a business decision, whether it's a technology play, whether it's a process play, I don't care. It's a business decision because they're deciding how much do we want to invest, where do we invest, when do we invest, right? And our job is to help inform that as much as we can. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to have all the answers, but it's going to be a lot better than a blank sheet of paper in my mind, right? So that's our role. With that, we need to think in terms of an entrepreneurial mindset. So I talked about our startup, that business, having that innovative mindset, looking ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I know we're hearing the banging in the room, so we've already notified our Best Buy partners, and they will have somebody take a look at it. Sometimes the HVAC system gets a little funky, so just FYI.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Jenny, for that commercial break. Yeah, so anyhow, we have to have that entrepreneurial mindset. We need to, I know in the last keynote, thinking within the box, I don't know if any of you have done design thinking, I have. It is about thinking without any constraints, but there are boxes we create such that we're not in perpetual pontification mode, which is sometimes what architects get, which I say, labeled as, that academic. No, we got a time box. We need to kind of put some pins in it and move forward because we do need to show some outputs. We need to show some value, and we need to keep pace with our business. There needs to be a rate of progress. And it's easy for architects to slide backwards and continue to just go back and forth. You've got a lot of smart people, like in this room, and when you get them all in a room and you're trying to align on a concept or a topic, we're probably the most challenging people to do that with because everybody has a different way of thinking or doing, right? So, and then building trust and credibility. I can't say enough. Networking, building those relationships are so key. With your stakeholders, whether it's in IT or outside the 4 walls of IT, especially outside the 4 walls of IT, because you're there to be their trusted advisor and consultant. So you almost have to think of yourself as a consulting agency in itself. I'm going to go out, I'm going to start grooming, and I'm going to start building those relationships at a time when it's in a good mode, because sometimes when the stuff starts hitting the fan, you don't want to start building a relationship then. Ultimately, you want to have that relationship you can fall back on and you can start to respond, right? So those are the type of things you need to do. Okay, so we talked about the problem. We talked about why soft skills are important and being aware of those and navigating those, and then how do you address that? Principles being a good fallback, because you fall back on a principle framework, which then helps take the tension away and saying, here's some of the principles we've aligned to in terms of why and value, is a great technique to get a conversation at the level it needs to be. So what's next? Again, principles definitely are there to help, and it's not the be-all end-all, but you need to reclaim the intention and create the space for reflection. And that's another word I heard in the conference today too. Architects have to reflect. We need bandwidth to do that. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of react. I know even where I'm at today, hey, all hands on deck, we need to work on this work stream because of this happened, and now can architects look at this? But a lot of architects grow up through over the years, and they understand that ecosystem, so they get called on as a subject matter expert. It's not necessarily architecture at that point. They're there because they understand it. And the slippery slope there is they'll get caught up into that, and then they're not architecting, they're actually responding to these reactive things, right? So how do we get beyond that? And how do we ensure that we create the bandwidth? Separating outcomes or optics from outcomes. I struggle to find incentives that really focus on outcomes outside of our core objectives as a company are there, but they're not distilled at a level that I could say, yeah, I'm contributing to this, and here's how that's going to work, and here's my contribution for this outcome that ultimately rolls up to that, almost like a leading indicator concept. It's geared towards, did you get these submitted at the right time? Is this particular diagram up to date? And all these type of things. That's important, but again, the question is, what's that really driving? What's the value, right? And then it's okay to say, we need to pause. There's a tendency to say, we got to make a decision now. I've seen so many times when we're in this, okay, go fast, but then it's another 2 weeks before anything happens. Like, oh, for God's sake. So it's okay to say, we need to pause. Let's really think through this. Give me some time. I'll come back. And again, I mentioned principles as a great mechanism to do that and at least cultivate that critical thinking. And then I mentioned, getting to know your stakeholders, but it's just as important to get some peers and advocacy in terms of what you do. It goes a long ways because it's not just Tim. Now I've got Paul, I've got so-and-so. They understand the why. We need this. And that's when you start to build the momentum in terms of getting the traction you need and the attention that's required. So some basic fundamentals. And again, none of this is rocket science. I'm certain all of you guys have done some form of this in some way. Back to the fundamental question, what problem are we solving? It's amazing. I've asked that question on some teams and they'll have me come in and review something. And I said, what are we really solving for? What's the business problem? And they don't know. And I'm like, guys, you're architects. You need to know. And in one instance, and this was at Cargill, it was a team in Asia. They said, Tim, can you review this? Blah, blah, blah. Sure. I said, what are we solving for? What's the problem? There was silence. I said, get back to me when you know. They came back and said, we don't know. We've actually stopped it. I said, that's great. We're not wasting time on something, right? So that's important. The value is another question, the why, the outcome. I've heard in some stakeholders, well, you're in technology. Why do you care what the value is? And I'm like, we're one team, one goal. I don't care where you sit in the org. We're here to improve and enable our company, and we need to work together. So yes, I need to understand why. And so you are justified, and in fact, it's accountable on you to ask that question, say why, what are we really trying to solve if you don't know? And you can give an out and say, if you don't know, then let's figure that out before we go any further, because if we don't have a clear target and what we're shooting for, which has happened, then why are we doing this, right? It's just a basic fundamental. Principles, I talked about that. Options with trade-offs is typical, especially when you get into whether it's concepts and or solution architecture. You're trying to diminish as many assumptions as you can. You're trying to expose any potential risks as you start to move into a new direction or new solution. Stakeholders, understanding your audience. I've done some stakeholder mapping. Probably the most recent was when I was doing A4G work the last couple of years, Architect for Good through Linda's organization. We actually did a stakeholder map because the organization we were working with really didn't have a handle on all their stakeholders, and it was critical because they had different messaging required for them. They needed to approach them differently. That same technique could be utilized internally. I will admit I haven't done that yet, but I think it's a really good way just to at least take time to reflect on it. Whether you expose that or not, or use it after that, probably it's up to you, but it's just a good way to say, who are my stakeholders? Who are the key people? It'll accelerate your engagement. It'll get clarity on, hey, do we have all the right people or not? Those type of things. It also fits really well if you've done design thinking personas is another thing. Tipping that in is really important because then you get to really overtly and intentionally think about, okay, where is this person at? What do I need to do? What are their strengths and so on and so forth? Decisions, based on principles or what have you, options, when a decision is made, it is so important to write it down, pen to paper, log it. As human beings, we forget. And sometimes there's the convenience of forgetting, especially if something doesn't work later on, you always have that to fall back on. So back to principles being a core of doing that is really important. However, we know there's many other tools and techniques, and there's a little bit of commercial for business architecture. Since I'm passionate about it, we talked about principles, capability models, what the business requires to enable their business I've used that multiple times. This is an effective way to provide reference and context, and it really helps support that advising consulting role as an architect. I'll give some examples. The A4G is an example. They didn't have any idea what their business model was, much less their capabilities. We defined them, and it was a conversation. And that conversation itself lended itself value because they started to realize how many things they required to run their business. They really never had a map. And as we did that, they wanted to map the org to it. And I said, that's perfectly fine. We can do that. So you adapt and you adjust. To find no big surprise, they are under-resourced. And then I started just asking leading questions. I said, you don't need to answer them. I said, are you in a position to execute on these capabilities? Which capabilities are required for your strategy? What are the most important? Oh, that's a good question. So it started to open their eyes to a bigger view, whereas before it was just execute, right? Same thing at Blue Cross. We used it for that. We used it in Cargill for chalking lines for a big program. Who owns what capability? It helped the program because then they knew who to talk to, because they knew which capabilities they owned. And this was a big ERP transformation. So super, super, super effective. It also helps the architect because now we understand what they do. Did this in the turkey business, by the way. That team didn't understand their business end to end. We did it not so much in capabilities, but value streams, which I love because value streams put the emphasis on why and value. And that was interesting because the comments were, I had no idea this is what we did. Oh, this is where that happens. Then they started to see the sequence. Then I started asking the hard question, why are you doing this? What's the value? What are you producing? Good question. Are you measuring it? So on and so forth. So, and again, they're directional. They're not fully reflective of 100% accurate, but it's enough to generate the right questions, the right visibility. And then that ultimately lends itself to combining those principles, these type of techniques, when fit for purpose, really starts to get you into an architecture consulting role. And it puts it on a framework, and it starts to take some of that tension away from the individual and puts it on the framework, and it starts to get people to really collaborate together. One sheet of music is a term I always use for that. So with that, I mentioned in the beginning, we talked about the problem. Why is this important? Here's some what's next things you could do. Anchoring decisions and principles. What's your commitment to action? What are some takeaways? Even if it's as simple as saying, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit more overt on what are we solving for? What outcome are we driving towards? And then asking, do we have the right information in front of us to understand what that outcome is? Or do we have enough information or context to know what it's going to take to get to that outcome? and then start applying some of those different tools where needed. And you don't necessarily have to expose those to the stakeholders out of the gate, but even behind the scene, just to get your head wrapped around it, but then expose it and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Does this make sense? This is what I know. I did this with our pricing inventory team this past spring. We did event storming. It's a domain-driven design framework. So I got a fairly good understanding of the complexity there, which was really complex. However, what I did is I took that and abstracted, put it in value streams. I said, here's my understanding. Does that resonate? And they said, yeah, they hadn't seen it before. Super cool. Super rewarding for an architect when people light up and they go, this is helpful. So the mantra is, how can I help, really, is really important. So that's the spirit of influence. That's the spirit of driving impacts for individuals that ultimately are teams. And it's a rate of progress that starts to move the dial in the right direction. You're never going to get to the end state, the utopia, but you're moving in the right direction, and then continue to build on that. And it's navigating those tensions, those behaviors, those forces is really critical. So that is really what I wanted to convey today. I'm hoping this resonates with you. I saw nods. This is the art, not so much the science. I sprinkled a little bit of that in there, but let's carve new paths together. And I say that intentionally because as a community, we're here to help each other. And if anybody has questions, or even after the conference you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to do that. I learned from you too. I learned from everybody. I even learned from my daughters, believe it or not. So they have a good insight on relationships and what have you. So also, just so you're aware, I think this deck will be shared. I did throw in the appendix different templates because sometimes that's helpful to help visualize some of this stuff. Again, none of this is probably you haven't seen already, but I think it's important. It's just human nature. We want to be able to see things, right? So anyhow, thank you.
Who wants to pepper him with questions? He's very excited for questions.
Michael.
Yeah, this was really well articulated. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
A couple of things like on incentives, on the CEO of my last company I worked with, he had a great phrase. Incentives are good, understanding them, but he always talked about aligned incentives.
Sure.
I really like that one a lot because then, like you said, they're misaligned, but if you have aligned, you're actually like going the same way. And I thought that was helpful. I get this question a lot, like, what's the best class you ever took to become an architect? And I tell them, I took a consultative selling class for one of our sales organizations. And I'm telling you what, that was still the best class I ever had on anything.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a week long, how to sell. And that's all we do.
Yeah.
So not a question, but more of that. But I do have a question, like, how did this is just your own mental model? You put all this together?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm impressed.
I was taking many years of experience and trying to, how do I aggregate it up? And I think about it every day because when I show up at work, I'm like, okay, what can I do differently? How can I add more value? I'm probably my worst critic. And so it's a constant thing for me because the idea is I need to continually calibrate. And then how do I start to create habits that will reinforce that? And I think that's a key element I forgot to mention is do the little things, start to build the habit, the mindset, the mental map, right? And it'll eventually become almost automatic. And don't have fear of doing so and just do. You'll be surprised at how people respond to that. People are looking for people to take the lead and drive. Architects are in a position to do that. Whether you don't think you are or not, you are. And just do, and you'll be surprised the response. Now, in some cases, it might not always be a positive, but that's okay too, because then you look for the advocates and the people that are open to it. And that's what I did. We would look for who's willing to do that. And then you focus your energy there, right? So, yep.
So I think you just said something really important, and I'm a leader of a business architecture team, and I'm trying to have them really see, they've always felt consultative, right? You said that multiple times, but they don't feel as though it's their place to lead. We don't want to step on toes. our organization has changed. It really is their place to lead, and people are looking for them to lead. How do you get that mindset change? So I'm empowering them. They know that, but it's ooh, I don't want to step on toes. Like, how do you change that mindset?
Great question. And believe it or not, I struggle with that a little bit myself, right? I'll be really transparent. A couple suggestions or thoughts based on my experience, and I'm living it today even. One, it's a confidence thing, a little bit. So you can help, and you said empower, and be really over and say, I've got your back. Here's some suggestions. Go do, and have a conversation. Start there. And if you need help, or if you need me to, if you need suggestions or coaching, let me know. That helps, right? Because people aren't necessarily going to act on their own. They want to make sure someone has their back. As a leader, you can do that. And then really advocate for building relationships. It doesn't have to start with an architecture conversation. It starts with a simple question of, hey, I saw you in the org, I'm starting to work in this area, or I will be. I'd love to understand better what you do. People love to tell their story. You start to build a relationship. So like, for instance, I'm doing that with our crew team. I reached out to them last spring. They wanted me to come down to Atlanta. I said, would you be willing to sit with us and see our operation? I said, absolutely. We have no initiative. We have nothing going on right now. It has paid dividends. I have advocates, and I'm starting to lean into that area now. So it's that constant networking and building those relationships, starting there. Yep.
I can't help but also kind of bring together some of the things we've heard in this room for those who have kind of stayed in here or been on a couple. I'm harking back to Joseph. You were talking about you're not the hero, make them the hero. Really sit and listen to what they are trying to say. I'm thinking about the beautiful puppet show, beautiful, by the way, around kindness and trying to, educate ourselves and getting more materials and things and really inspire us and try something new. So really fabulous. Thank you.
Great.
Are there any other questions or comments or things you might want to share?
So with your architects that work with you, how aware do you make them of the actual strategic value? Because you drive into the operations, you drive into the value streams to help get those projects across the line, to help get the changes across. But are they aware of how that impacts the strategic objectives? Is that language in some of the language that you use? So I'm working with this capability, and this capability is tied directly into two of our strategic objectives. Are they using that language? Do you coach them to use that language? So it's different than looking at the operations. I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, good question. First of all, capability is an overused word. And I always say you need to qualify that, and usually when I talk about it, I say it's a business capability. But even on my team where I work today, it's just capability. And I said, what do you mean by capability? Give me an example, right? Yeah. And I'm not picking on you, but yeah. But in terms of the language and answering your question on, do I hear some of that connection? It depends, right? And it really almost comes down to an individual level to some degree. I could say for certainty, like in the strategic team, they understand it, but they aren't necessarily armed with the techniques to do it, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they have some of that background because some come from the Big Six or what have you. But for the most part, once you get into the actual teams that are operational, they're not equipped to do that. And definitely there's a gap of here's your objectives for the company, here's our objectives for our department, and then here's some ideas and here's projects. Is usually how it works, right? And that's fairly consistent. And hence, Wendy Keene's book, Strategy to, I always forget, Reality, I say execution. That's the gap we're trying to fill. It's a hard gap to fill because not everybody's wired for that. And back to that instant gratification, what I talked about, people are looking for an answer now. I need to get value, and value is perceived as getting something done, a thing. One of my peers I worked with, Scott Earleton, who's here, we always said, yeah, they're chasing the thing, the bright, shiny object. It's like they're losing sight of the why. They're losing sight of the value. And it's not to say that thing isn't going to benefit or help enable a business capability or a process, but can they articulate the value it's going to enable? And usually the answer is no. And so trying to instill that way of thinking is probably the goal. And it's less about getting perfection on exactly, here's the value, here's how we're going to measure, and so on and so forth. That's a huge leap. But just to even have the conversation, I think, is a big step forward. So, yeah.
All right. Well, how about a little bit of extra time to go for a little bio break before you get to your next session? Thank you, Tim, so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the questions.
And I just heard a juicy rumor that if you've been hearing the Thinking AI sessions and there was a supposed white paper, that it is currently sitting on our TCBF website. We're going to push that over to where all of the presentations are. So I believe there's be a survey. You'll complete the survey, a little bit of a negotiation there, and then it'll be really short and quick, and then you'll get access to those files. Thank you.